There's a moment just before disaster when the world goes quiet. The birds stop calling. The wind loses its song. Even the insects, those tireless background drummers of the earth, fall still. Most people miss that moment, or dismiss it as coincidence. But those who live by nature's rules know better. In the wild, silence isn't peace. It's a prelude. A breath held before a scream. It's a warning. This is the story of Elias Turner, known to most as Swift. A trapper, survivalist, and myth in the making by 1887. His reputation had grown like wildfire across the American frontier, especially in the unforgiving sprawl of the Arizona Territory. He wasn't a loud man. He didn't spin yarns in saloons or flaunt scars like some dime novel desperado. Instead, his legend rose from something far rarer, truth. Not tall tales, but whispered respect. Swift had survived when others hadn't. He knew where the rivers vanished into the earth, where wolves denayed in the sandstone cliffs, and how to outwalk thirst. By the fall of that year, few knew the Colorado Plateau's brutal hinterlands better than Swift. His boots had carved trails into canyons no maps bothered to name. Locals called him a ghost in buckskin. But legends, for all their glory, are still mortal. And the desert, as it always does, was preparing to remind him. It began with a whisper. Or rather, the absence of one. 3 days into a hunt that had already tested his patience and stripped away comfort, Swift noticed something off. The trail he followed belonged to a mountain lion, a massive tom rumored to be the size of a small mule and just as mean. Scarred, bold, and unafraid of firelight, it had been stalking the outskirts of a mining encampment called Dry Ridge. Livestock had gone missing. So had a few dogs. One man claimed it circled his tent in the dead of night, close enough to breathe on the canvas. The creature had become a phantom of tooth and claw. To the miners, it was a terror. To Swift, it was a challenge. The first 2 days of tracking went as expected, rising at dawn, following spoor and scat, noting claw marks on trees and the broken rhythm of birds alerting each other overhead. But on the third morning, everything changed. There was no rhythm. No song. The desert had gone mute. Swift woke in darkness, his fire reduced to cold ash. Usually, even in the stillest hours, he'd hear something, wind scuttling sand across stone, a cricket scratch, maybe the hoot of an owl riding the updrafts. But that morning, it was as if the world had been paused. The silence was absolute. He tried to dismiss it. Maybe the wind had simply shifted. Maybe the heat had dulled the ecosystem's edge. Still, his instincts gnawed at him. Swift had learned to survive not by trusting logic, but by listening to unease. And his body, his bones, were uneasy. He crouched beside a small stream, more of a thirsty ribbon than a real flow, and splashed what was left of its coolness onto his face. That's when he saw it. A crow, large, solitary, perched on a ragged outcrop just ahead. It didn't call. It didn't fidget. It stared straight at him, a black shard against the blushing stone. Seconds passed. Swift stood still. Then, with no apparent cause, it dropped forward and hit the sand. Dead. No cry. No flutter. No reason. Swift froze. He waited for a gunshot. There was none. No wound, no blood, just a lifeless crow cooling in the dust. For a man who understood natural death intimately, this wasn't that. It was off-script. Unexplained. And the desert didn't do random. That was when he felt it, a vibration in his boots, a ripple in the ground that barely reached the skin. He shifted back, half a step, and from beneath the stone nearest the crow's body came a sound no desert man ignores. A hiss. The diamondback lay coiled, thick as a man's forearm, eyes the color of old brass. Its tongue tasted the morning, flicking toward him. It hadn't struck yet, but it had been ready. Perhaps waiting for warmth, perhaps baiting prey. If Swift had stepped forward, if he hadn't paused, its fangs would have found the soft skin above his boot. He should have killed it. That was the rule out here, kill or be killed. But he didn't. He only stared. Then backed away slowly. Later, he'd recall that moment as the first in a string of events that felt too deliberate to be coincidence. The crow, the snake, the silence. Separately, perhaps chance. But together? It felt like a sequence. A puzzle made of unease. He moved on, deeper into the canyons. The lion's tracks were still there, but different now. Uneven. One paw dragged slightly. A limp. A sign of injury. A healthy predator is dangerous, a wounded one is worse. It's desperate. Unpredictable. It doesn't play by the same rules. Still, Swift pressed forward. His mind was sharp, honed by years of outwitting both beast and nature. He believed knowledge beat luck. That signs told stories if read correctly. But that night, the story changed again. As the desert darkness pressed in, the air cooled quickly. Rocks that had been burning by noon now radiated chill. Swift didn't light a fire. Something told him not to. The lion was too close. Then, out of the silence, came a sound that made the marrow in his spine shift. A roar. Deep. Vibrating. But not a challenge. A warning. It echoed, bounced off the cliffs like it was being passed between ghosts. Swift sat perfectly still beneath an overhang of stone, knife at hand, every nerve listening. But the sound didn't repeat. His father's voice came back to him then, not as memory but as command. Don't run from the wild. You only end up running from yourself. So he stayed. Through the night. Through the shifting dark. By morning, everything had changed. His pack, his lifeline, was gone. Not misplaced. Not scavenged by raccoons or torn by wind. Gone. Lifted clean. The sand showed prints, human prints. Swift bent over them slowly. Narrow, deliberate. Someone had followed him. Perhaps watched as he slept. Perhaps waited for the silence of that lion's warning to move in and steal what mattered most. He was now alone. No water. No rifle. No food. Just a blade and the blistering sun that had begun to rise with malicious clarity. Most stories end here. A man lost. A tale half told. A cautionary whisper of bones bleached on the stone, of coyotes scattering what was left. But Swift wasn't most men. Instead of stumbling forward, he turned around. Not metaphorically. Literally. He walked backward. He retraced his steps with precision that bordered on madness. Every rock he remembered, he found. Every track he had made, he studied again. The rhythm of his hunt became the rhythm of his survival. The hunter now hunted memory itself. Hours passed. His tongue cracked. His skin blistered. But something drove him, not desperation, but awareness. The crow. The snake. The roar. Each had been a sign. Not omens. Not magic. Markers. Warnings disguised as nature. The desert had spoken, and he had listened. Perhaps not quickly. Perhaps not fully. But enough. At high noon, delirious with heat, he stumbled upon a small cave he remembered passing. A shallow bowl carved by wind and time, shaded by a rock shelf. He crawled in like a man reborn. Inside, water. A stagnant pool, rank and warm, but wet. He drank. He wept. That evening, he found the man who had taken his pack. A young Apache boy, no older than 16, gaunt and sunburnt, dressed in torn calico and fear. He hadn't meant to steal it. He hadn't expected the man he'd taken it from to live. He had simply needed it more. Swift didn't strike him. He sat across from him, wordless, and shared what little he'd recovered. They sat in silence, two survivors, each marked by the desert in different ways. Later, the boy told Swift something he never forgot. He said the lion was real. But it wasn't just a lion. The tribe called it Diogit Sostsaidi, the beast that watches. Said it showed up when balance had been broken. When men took too much from the land. When they ignored the silence. That's why the birds fled. Why the snake waited. Why the crow died. Not punishment. A message. Some called it superstition. Swift didn't. Not anymore. He never caught the lion. Or maybe he did, and simply understood, finally, it wasn't his to catch. He left the canyons weeks later, thinner but sharper. Not with meat or pelts or trophies. But with clarity. He returned to town and never spoke of it much. But those who knew him said something in his eyes had changed. Not fear. Not regret. Awareness. Sometimes, when he sat on the porch of his cabin, a crow would land nearby. And Swift would nod, slowly, as if acknowledging a debt not yet paid. Because in the wild, silence isn't just absence. It's memory. It's language. And if you're lucky, and quiet enough, you might just survive long enough to hear what it's trying to tell you. There's a moment, brief, often imperceptible, before disaster strikes. A hush. The world stills. Birds cease their chatter. The wind forgets its name. Even insects, ever busy custodians of the underbrush, fall into an unnatural quiet. Those who live far from nature often miss this moment. But to those like Elias, Swift, Turner, men of the backcountry, who've learned to hear what most never notice, this silence is the loudest warning of all. Swift wasn't born into legend. He earned it, one winter at a time. Trapper, tracker, and survivalist, he'd roamed the canyonlands for nearly 3 decades. They said he could read ant trails like scripture, that he could tell a man's weight by how deep his boots sank in fresh snow. But even legends, it turns out, get tested. And Swift's test came not in a blizzard or ambush, but under a pale sun, beside a dry creek bed, when his world had narrowed to thirst and regret. It was nearly midday when he saw it, a glint in the sand. The sun had long since burned off the morning chill. The canyons shimmered like molten glass. Dust caked his boots. His lips were cracked, his skin leathered from too many days without shelter. He'd been circling for hours, every landmark looking like the last. Hunger he could manage. But thirst, that was the thief that robbed reason. And then there it was. Nestled near the base of a stone ledge, his canteen. Next to it, the rifle he'd lost 2 days earlier, slung neatly across a smooth rock. Folded carefully in the folds of his blanket, a piece of parchment, no bigger than a hand, marked by a single, crude fingerprint. No name. No ink flourish. Just a message. Thief fears footprints, leaves his own to mark your strength. Follow crow, follow lion. Balance your fear with focus. He read it once. Then again. The words were simple, but they landed like thunder in a tight canyon. This wasn't some careless theft. This was deliberate. The items hadn't just been taken. They'd been moved. Positioned. Laid out as if in a ritual, each artifact a symbol, a breadcrumb in a larger puzzle. It struck him, then, that someone had been watching him. Studying him. Not to kill him, at least not yet, but to teach him. The note wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. A challenge, even. One wrapped in parable and animal metaphor. Swift didn't know if the author was a man, a woman, or something stranger. But he understood instinctively, this was a test. Maybe spiritual. Maybe human. Maybe both. In the west, those lines were always blurred. He sat beneath a twisted mesquite tree and let the note rest in his lap. For hours, he didn't move. Didn't hunt. Didn't sharpen his knife or recheck his maps. He just sat, canteen against his lips, rifle across his knees, staring into the horizon as the wind picked up and the day grew old. He'd spent his life trying to master the land, reading it like an opponent. But now, he wondered if that was his mistake. Maybe the land wasn't meant to be conquered. Maybe it was meant to be understood. As the shadows lengthened and the sun dipped below the canyon rim, he heard a sound that snapped him back into focus. Not a roar. A whimper. Low. Ragged. Guttural. The sound of something once fearsome, now broken. The lion had returned. It came through the narrow pass to the east, where rocks funneled the wind and the scent of blood could hang for hours. Swift was ready. He'd climbed above the pass hours earlier, perch secured, rifle loaded, trigger finger loose but alert. Every hunter knows that a wounded predator is more dangerous than a healthy one. But this lion wasn't stalking. It was limping. Its left paw was swollen, bloodied from a gash that looked infected. Every step it took left a red imprint on the rocks. Its ribs showed through matted fur. Its head drooped low, not in submission, but exhaustion. And its eyes, once said to hold the fire of old gods, now blinked with something altogether different. Pain. Weariness. And perhaps, recognition. The rifle felt heavy in Swift's hands. He had the shot. A clean one. The beast stood exposed in the corridor of rock, framed by dusk and desperation. One squeeze would have ended it. Would have ended everything, the hunger, the fear, the strange sense of being hunted in his own hunt. But he didn't shoot. Because in that moment, he saw not a challenge to conquer, but a mirror. He, too, had limped across this land. He, too, bore wounds unseen. He, too, was tired of fighting everything, all the time. The lion stopped, raised its head, and looked up. Their eyes met. Time stretched. The lion blinked once. Then twice. And without a sound, it turned and vanished into the brush, leaving only blood and silence in its wake. Swift let the rifle rest in his lap. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, he exhaled without defense. That night, he did something he rarely did. He wrote in his journal. I came here to take a life. I left having been given one. The crow warned. The snake taught. The lion forgave. And the land, as always, remembered. That single entry, faded and near illegible, was the only written account he ever gave of what happened in those canyons. Decades later, after Swift passed quietly in a hand-built cabin near the Utah border, a forest ranger clearing out the property found the journal beneath a loose floorboard. The leather binding was dry, but intact. Most pages were blank. But not that one. And it leaves us with a question more pressing now than ever. How many of us actually listen to the warnings life gives us? We live surrounded by noise. Notifications. Algorithms. Constant motion. But the real danger isn't in what's loud. It's in what's missing. The silence before a breakdown. The dead air before a betrayal. The quiet pain behind a smile. Swift's first warning wasn't the lion. It wasn't even the stolen gear. It was the crow. 3 days before finding his canteen, he'd seen it, a crow, black as coal, lying motionless on a high ridge. No blood. No sign of violence. Just, fallen. In many cultures, the crow is a harbinger, of change, of transition, sometimes of death. But Swift, ever the practical man, dismissed it. Birds die, he muttered. That's not a sign. That's life. He walked past. Now, years later, we ask ourselves, How many times have we walked past our own crow? Maybe it was a warning from a friend. A gut instinct in the middle of a meeting. A sharp, fleeting feeling in your stomach that said something's wrong here, and you pushed it aside, chalked it up to nerves or bad timing. Swift's journey wasn't just about wilderness survival. It was about emotional survival. The kind most men are never taught. The kind we often dismiss until it's too late. Let's consider the symbols that shaped his path. The crow, the one who warned. The one who lay still so that Swift might learn to move differently. In life, crows are often messengers, carriers of unseen truth. The crow in Swift's story represents those subtle signs we overlook. The relationship we neglect. The fatigue we ignore. The mental health warning we call just stress. The snake, though it isn't described directly in the tale, Swift would later reference the snake in another journal scrap found in the lining of his saddlebag. The snake hissed, but did not strike. That is a kind of mercy. The snake teaches patience. Threat without violence. Power held, not used. In our lives, the snake might be a difficult decision we delay, not out of fear, but wisdom. It teaches us that not every provocation needs a response. The lion, the adversary. But also, the mirror. Swift thought he came to conquer the beast. Instead, the beast revealed something Swift hadn't seen in years, his own vulnerability. His humanity. The lion teaches us that not all danger is evil. Some danger humbles us. Grounds us. Connects us to others. And of course, the land, the ever-present observer. Silent. Indifferent. Yet full of memory. The land holds the footprints of those who've come before. It doesn't speak, but it remembers. And in its silence, it offers the purest reflection of who we are when no one's watching. So what does Swift's story teach us, here and now? The West is gone. The horses, the saloons, the duels under sunset skies, they've become lore, not life. But the challenges remain. We still chase lions. Still miss the crow. Still fear the snake. Still try to bend the land, our relationships, our ambitions, our timelines, to our will. But maybe the point isn't to conquer. Maybe the point is to listen. To pause. To recognize that strength isn't always in pushing forward. Sometimes, it's in knowing when to kneel. When to admit you're lost. When to retrace your steps, even if your pride is screaming. Swift didn't leave behind riches. He didn't write books. Didn't seek glory. But what he did leave, a few words in a journal, the kind of words only written by men who've made peace with their ghosts, has survived longer than the rifle, the canteen, or even the trail he walked. I came here to take a life. I left having been given one. There's poetry in that. A quiet sort of grace. So if you're listening to this now and wondering if your lion is out there, or if maybe you are the lion, limping, tired, wounded, know this. You don't have to roar to be heard. Sometimes, it's enough to look up, meet the gaze of another soul, and move forward without violence. Because some stories don't end in gunfire. Some end in understanding. And those are the tales most worth telling.